Welcome to the Building Efficiency Resources podcast, the BERcast. We've got Sandy Gallo and Chris McTaggart here with Building Efficiency Resources doing a top 5 rewind from the ResNet Conference 2023 that we just got back from. So both Sandy and I are going to run down our lists of our top 5 takeaways from that conference. So, Sandy, good afternoon, sir. Leading up to Thanksgiving, how you feeling this week?
I'm feeling pretty ready for turkey, Chris. How about you, my friend?
Oh, yeah, I got it chilling in the fridge right now. I'm going to go ahead and do it up. My father-in-law told me 2 years ago at Thanksgiving that I prepared the best turkey that he had ever had in his life. And that's, I got a good relationship with my father-in-law, but, still,
It got even better after that.
Yeah, right. He's a discriminating chef too. He's not just, somebody who would throw around things like that. It's kind of like Paul Hollywood from a Great British Baking Show. If you get the nod, then you did something right. So, anyways, I'm looking forward to having the family over here in Detroit, Michigan for the holiday. Before we get into the main podcast topic, just one quick piece of news that came up. In my radar. It's interesting. I tend to get a lot of the news and updates I get from a website called thehill.com, which I kind of look forward to, sort of like a right center leaning political, journalistic hub online. And so I go there for a lot of political news, but within that website, they tend to have a lot of updates about green stuff, about what's going on with energy and the environment. And so the key takeaway from this week is that President Biden is enacting the Defense Production Authorization Act, I believe it's called, that was really originally intended to be for basically wartime efforts in order to accelerate the production of heat pump technologies. That's incredible.
Well, what's funny about that, Chris, is the last time that was used was during COVID for the vaccine.
I know.
I don't think they quite equal, but yeah.
Yeah, right. I guess the logic here is, I'm just going to say, I know a lot of people are saying there's already some political, feedback that's, hey, this is really not what this was for. This was for wartime efforts. But I think what's happening here is that the White House is recognizing that they signed the IRA last year, Inflation Reduction Act, that has a lot of juicy incentives for heat pumps. But if that money starts to hit here in this next year, we're going to run out of heat pumps. We're not going to have enough to be able to install in buildings. And so some of the benefit of that Inflation Reduction Act money may be lost because heat pumps could go up significantly in price, right? So if we don't have enough supply and the demand outstrips it, then the price is going to go up significantly. So, I don't know. You got any thoughts on this, Sandy?
Well, first I would say I think you're dead on with that, and I'm going to tell you why. Pretty much since the supply chain debacle, these HVAC producers have been working 24-hour shifts trying to keep up with demand. And it's not going to get better with all that money pumped in the economy for heat pumps, right? So I think it kind of makes sense that, that they're trying to increase production, because you're right. There's already, issues with project. Even last year still, we were going through the whole, not enough coils, you know what I mean? And now they're barely hanging in there. And now all this comes, and it's a lot of money. So, excuse me, I do think that you're pretty dead on there. And I think actually I read that because you shared it with me. If you want to know the truth, I think you shared that article with me. But that would be my take on it. And when I speak to all right, let's not get carried away. I'm just saying that all my friends I have in the actual HVAC business, from a standpoint of manufacturing, they're still giving me the same reports that they're way behind, that they're having a hard time keeping up. And I think that, this hopefully will improve the chances of all that, going away and actually being applicable in the world.
Yeah, because if you think about it this way, still to this day, heat pumps are a popular technology and increasingly so, but
Yeah.
they're not the standard of practice in many areas of the country.
Yeah.
And so, take the Northeast, a region that wants to electrify, has policy goals to electrify. Maybe the grid is clean enough to the point where it maybe makes sense to electrify. Now, I mean, there's a lot more that goes into this discussion. We had that conversation a couple different times now. And we're going to continue to have this conversation about the pros and cons of electrification and the pain points and the pitfalls of it potentially. But still, there's goals on the books to do this, and the IRA created a really palpable tool to help to achieve that goal financially, by heavily incentivizing heat pumps, heat pump water heaters, etc., in buildings. But if we don't have them, if there isn't a way in order to mobilize production meaningfully, then it's not going to achieve what it intended to achieve. So I view this as the White House getting ahead of an issue that they can foresee already happening. And again, I think we could have a political debate about whether or not using um, the Defense Authorization Production Act,
Yeah.
whether or not
Okay.
that's really the right vehicle for that or not. I think it depends on what your concept of the need case is. For some people, we're still in a paradigm where we're not too concerned about the climate. We're not too concerned about pollution, and that this is sort of, an agenda, and then there's, from the White House perspective, at the very least, that, climate change is real and it is a serious existential threat to the US economy, and to the world writ large. And so if you look at it through that lens, I think the use of that act makes a little bit more sense. I don't want to play politics. That's not really what we're here for
No.
necessarily, but
Well, I mean, I think the climate deniers are going to be against everything, no matter what you do. I mean, if you sharpened your pencil, they would tell you. I mean, it's just it's goofy. But I would say that I could see both sides of that, and I think the truth is somewhere in the middle. I think that and that's you and I've had this conversation before. I think pollution is just as big of a problem as the rest of it, but no one hardly ever talks about that. But I would say that, I could see both sides of it. Is it really necessary? I'm sure the manufacturers love it. You know what I mean? There's nothing like the government and mandates. I mean, look at World War II, when they just shut down the auto industry and, those car manufacturers went from producing cars to producing weapons, and at mass scale, never seen in the world before or since.
yeah,
So,
Sandy, where did all that happen?
New York. Nah,
Yeah,
Detroit.
right. You wish.
Come on, man, with the Detroit.
Our seal
No,
of
I gotta give
democracy
my
right here.
kudos to the Lions, though. I gotta give my kudos. That was a heck
Woo!
of a comeback win. Yeah, well, that's all we have to say about the Lions. But I would say that I could see both sides. I could see some of the concern, with that. I get it. But I also see the need and the issues. So I think it really depends on where you fall in the spectrum on how you're going to view that.
Right. Okay. Well, like everything, we're going to see how this continues to roll out. But at least it seems like, from a policy standpoint, that there's going to be some real follow through here with this IRA. I think that it's one of those things where it got signed last year, and
It's
the
like nobody
45.
believed it.
Yeah,
Like
right.
it
And
really was.
well, the
Hmm.
45L stuff in our industry is very like on top of
Hmm.
people's minds. But as you and I have discussed before, that's almost just the tip of the iceberg about what's
Drop in the
in that.
bucket. Yeah.
And a lot of this money going towards electrification. Um, that is arguably that's one of the biggest components of the IRA, or at least the intention of it. And so, this is kind of complementary in order to see that manifest. So we'll just have to see how things develop over this next year.
It's going to be interesting.
No doubt. Okay, rolling into segment number 2. So Sandy, you and I just got back from sunny, well, not so sunny, sometimes
Sort of
cloudy,
sunny.
San Diego. But it was quite nice. Pretty, kind of a cool venue. That might have been the nicest venue for a conference that ResNet's ever really been to, at least
You
during
think it
my
was better than
time.
Scottsdale? Really?
Well, you're right there on the ocean. I mean, come on, man, you can't beat the ocean,
Well,
you
I
know?
live on the ocean, so I guess that doesn't thrill me as much.
Yeah, I guess not. Well, for us, here in the upper Midwest, it was nice to get down to a place that was more warm, and to get out. Took a little sailboat out there in the harbor with Xavier Walter, our buddy from BPA, as the captain. I was his first mate, on a little 1 hour tour of the bay out in front of the hotel. But boy, basically, for the folks back at home who could not make it to the conference, we did have many Bear Raiders who were there, as well
We
as
did.
many of our other friends and colleagues from the industry. But for those who weren't there, I just kind of wanted to do a little bit of a back and forth, kind of running down our top 5 list of what are the things that we observed as kind of the highlight from the conference, or highlights and lowlights, we could say. So I'm going to go ahead with my number 5. So one of the cool things that I attended was actually the very last session of the conference. So yeah, I stuck around to the bitter end. Was with Gayatri Vijay Kumar and from Stephen Winters Association, who does a lot of work with the EPA Energy Star Multifamily New Construction Program. But she, along with Paul Raymer from the EPA's Indoor Air Plus program, gave a presentation on the EPA's Indoor Air Plus version 2 program. And so for those of you all who have worked with Indoor Air Plus up to this point, the program's been around since pretty much the whole time I've been in the industry, just about. But it's been in version 1 this entire time, and there have been some, revisions to the program, but really since really the late 2000s, Indoor Air Plus has kind of been what it's been. There hasn't been a lot of updates. So the program solicited public comment last year on updating the program. And what they've arrived at for version 2 is that there's going to be 2 different paths for Indoor Air Plus. There's going to be a standard Indoor Air Plus certified level, and then there's going to be an Indoor Air Plus Gold level. So the big takeaway from that is that Indoor Air Plus certified now can be applied to any building, any existing building or new construction building, and it does not require certification under EPA's Energy Star program. So that's kind of cool, because like if you work within any other green building program, let's say you're working within NGBS. And NGBS does not require Energy Star homes or multifamily certification. You can earn points for it, but it does not require certification. Well, that basically meant that you couldn't earn the points for Indoor Air Plus either, because you had to be certified under Energy Star. So now there's a path basically to point project teams towards a consensus best practice from the EPA for good indoor air quality that doesn't necessarily also obligate them to do either single family homes, Energy Star, or multifamily new construction. So I think that's a really big deal. And then, the gold standard basically has some more superior specs for indoor air quality that go above and beyond, so basically assisting project teams, developers, builders, and consumers, who really want to have an EPA brokered sort of consensus best practice indoor air quality standard. You can go for the Indoor Air Plus version 2 gold level program standard. So another cool thing that's coming out of this, or at least I think it's cool, is that if you're going to be a rater doing verification under Indoor Air Plus, you're going to have to take a training for it. So
Yeah.
apparently the EPA is going to own that training, but I think that's good because frankly speaking, as a provider, I found that oftentimes people get into Indoor Air Plus without really understanding what they're committing themselves to, and nobody is fully knowledgeable. And unfortunately,
Yeah.
then some things can sneak past the goalie, and you get to the end of the project, and whoops, there's something that we didn't do, and now basically the home is non-compliant. So I think it's not the worst idea that we're going to have, an actual, accreditation to be earned for Indoor Air Plus. The idea between two programs, I'm sort of on the fence about that. I think that there's something to be said for simplicity of just having one standard. But I guess I understand the intention to say they wanted to offer a path for non-Energy Star projects to be able to earn the credential, and then they want to basically honor, the programs that go above and beyond. So I don't know.
So
Sandy, any thoughts
question
on that?
are
Yeah.
so my first question is, because I wasn't in that, I was at an Energy Star meeting. um, what is the requirement for Energy Star now, though? Is it gold or is it can be either?
Well, Energy Star doesn't require Indoor Air
No,
Plus.
no, not Energy Star. I meant Zero Energy Ready Homes. Don't you have to be able to? I said the wrong thing. Sorry about that. But what is the requirement now? Can you do either or do you have to do one?
I believe that it is going to just be certified.
So it'd be
Um,
certified.
yeah.
Okay.
But honestly, right now, Zero Energy Ready Homes, until Indoor Air Plus finished whatever they were doing, they kind of left it a little bit open ended. So we'll see what the DOE chooses to implement. They may very well choose to implement gold.
Okay. And then I would say my only other feedback is I'm kind of mixed about, accepting it every way, Like I mean I see the benefit to it for, expanding the program, you know? Um but I also, I just wonder if it's, gonna, I don't want to say diminish the value, but it almost, starts to compete against itself in some way. You know what I mean? I don't know. I'm kind of mixed on that.
Yeah, I definitely see both sides. Like for example, there's a project here in Detroit that I'm involved with that's pursuing enterprise green communities, and they're doing it, basically the program, and there's an option for them to earn Indoor Air Plus points under that, but it's a renovation project, so they can't actually earn the points for that. So, again,
Sure.
I think that there is some value to pointing to a consensus standard that someone can adopt, even if they aren't going all the way to Energy Star. And especially, I would say now that Energy Star multifamily new construction is as complex and comprehensive as it is, it may make sense. But anyways, that's my number five. Sandy, what's your number five?
I would say that my number five through this would be, the build for rent market is a giant opportunity for Raiders, not only right now, but also to come, right? I mean, everything you read is about build for rent, build for rent, build to rent, build to rent. Here in Florida, I've seen a fundamental switch from, mostly either townhomes or single family homes to a lot of build to rent communities. They're building one right up the road here from me, 4 miles from the ocean. It's 900 units. And I just think that with the housing, there's two sides to that whole story. Some people like it, some people don't. um whether you like it or not, and it's kind of like anything else we do, it's a reality, right? It's like ESG, it's a reality, it's not questioned. And these build to rent communities, I mean, you look at anybody from like, you know you name the builder, they have a build to rent, involvement in some way. Whether, you can name all your top five builders, I won't name any names, but every one of them are involved in it. Probably the top 10 are, if you want to know the truth. And that's not even considering all the build to rent companies that exist out there, and there's quite a few of them, and they've seen substantial growth. So, I mean, honestly, if I was a Raider today and I was really looking to expand my business, that would be a place I'd be looking. And none of this is really, everything we talk about from 45L to rebates to energy efficiency. They're not immune to that either. You know what I mean? They're still building homes. They're still building. I mean, there's even like I'm seeing like these like in Daytona and a few places around me, they're building these like small cottage style apartments now, where it almost looks like a single family home, but they're all stacked in like, it kind of looks like what is that, Cindy Lou Who's neighborhood? Whoville? But it's a popular thing. And I mean, you can't build. I mean, Florida gets 1,000 new residents a day. Texas gets more than that. A lot of the South is seeing, a great influx of families moving in, and you can't build one of these places and not fill them instantaneously. And I just think that you're going to see more and more of this, and Raiders are making a mistake if they're not really, circling in on that wagon, because I think it represents a humongous opportunity, that did not really exist in this capacity before. And I only think it's going to get bigger. Everything I'm reading, all points to a tremendous rise in build to rent communities. And it's really, I haven't seen it affect the single family community at all. It's like plus, you know what I mean? So, we're really not seeing that. So, I mean, there's a little downtick because of the economy and interest rates, but not really in the hot places. You know what I mean? Not in the smile of the country and stuff. So, I mean, that would be my biggest intel. I mean, there was several sessions on it. It was talking. There was build to rent representatives there. Um, and I just think that, you're remiss if you're not taking care of, getting involved in that opportunity.
Right. Yeah, so I mean, there's sort of two different like lenses to look at this topic. There's the social element, is it good for society? Are we does this say something about affordability, or does this say something about the American dream of owning a home that now, people are profiteering off of build to rent type of scenarios? Are they exacerbating the challenges of affordability because they're taking prime developable land, and instead of them being converted into homes that someone could acquire and turn into a real estate asset for themselves, now it's rentable basically land. But
I
you
read
know
an
what?
article the other day, Chris, that actually was titled "The Build to Rent Community is Ruining Affordability in the U.S." That was the title of the article, and I mean, they
Right.
had some points. I get it.
Well, here's the thing, Sandy and I, we're not social engineers, we're not policymakers. But what we are is we're a couple guys that have our pulse on the nature of the industry. And I'll say what the good news is, for our industry. Every 10 years or so, people go, when's the bubble going to burst? So the bubble burst back in the late 2000s, and now we've had another steady but inclining growth trend in residential new construction over the last 15 years. And so everybody's just assuming that the bubble's going to burst. There's going to be a recession. Housing is just going to fall off a cliff again. Well, this is potentially a very sustainable opportunity for housing, because people still have to have a place to live, even if they're not going to buy it. And so, in a lot of ways, as someone who is looking to, continue a career in this whole industry of home certifications and evaluations, I consider this to be a big opportunity, and a very sustainable for business opportunity, because even if,
Sure.
say, for sale new homes kind of fell off a cliff, I don't necessarily see that in the cards in the way that some people do. I mean, obviously there's a lot of clickbait ads out there that want to tell you that the sky is falling, and it might, you never know. But I don't necessarily see that myself. But yeah, I mean, this is something that can potentially carry the rating industry through, even if we did have, a situation where, for sale new construction sort of receded. And then I think people ask, well, but why would they want to do ratings? Well, for all the same reason why a single family builder wants to do ratings.
Sure.
They still have to do energy code compliance in areas that have, more aggressive energy codes that require some degree of third party compliance. The 45L is still an option for them. For 45L, it's for builders that are selling or leasing homes, homes that are acquired, which means either sold or leased for a builder to earn the 45L credit. And then, utility incentive dollars still available to those types of builders as well. And then also, a lot of these companies are also participating in ESG. And so, again, builders are labeling homes for ESG all around the country in order to have their stocks considered as part of ESG, basically, financial products. And so I see this as being a really good thing for the rating community, whether it's a good thing for society writ large. I'm sure many, sociological and economics papers will be written on that and debated, but that's beyond my pay grade.
Well,
So
yeah, I
moving
mean,
on.
I was just reading. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off
Go
there,
ahead.
but I was just reading another article about BlackRock and how they're investing in these build to rent communities and just rental communities in general. And a big part of that is ESG, right? So they're seeking opportunities that can help them. So again, your points are well taken and very applicable in this situation. All right, man. Number 4. What you got for number 4?
Number 4. We still have inconsistent rating software. Still. So, 4 years ago at the ResNet conference 2019, actually it's getting closer to 5 years ago because the ResNet conference 2019 would have been in February 2019, and so that's only 3 months away from 5 years basically. So 4 and 3/4 years
Time
ago,
flies, man.
there was a presentation at the ResNet conference from the ResNet Software Consistency Committee, basically to talk about an analysis performed on the worst kept secret in the industry, which was that we had 3 different accredited rating softwares and that they were all producing sometimes dramatically different energy rating index, HERS index scores. And the big takeaway from 2019 was that the bounds for compliance through the best test accreditation procedure, basically the software algorithmic analysis compliance thingamajig that basically all the softwares have to put themselves through to demonstrate that they can be good enough to be a ResNet accredited software tool, that essentially those bounds were too large, too wide of bounds. And so it was allowing for very significant disparities in calculation of different assembly types, features, energy consuming features within the software. So what are some of these things? Well, how is heat lost off of foundations to the ground? Believe it or not, that's more complex than you would think. It's not a proven, there's only one way to do it kind of way. How are ducts simulated in different type of conditions? How is ventilation and infiltration simulated? Windows, how are they simulated? So that's what the best test procedure is dump your results of some scenario homes into this calculator and we'll see what your results are. And as long as they're within this band of tolerance, then you're good to go. Well, those best tests were based off of essentially simulation compliance engines from the 80s and 90s, really primarily. So some more out of date engines. And so as a result, basically the bounds were too wide. And so, programs, software tools like Ecotrope, RemRate, and Energy Gauge, they all were somewhere within those bounds. But it turned out that, especially once RemRate moved to its hourly engine based off of Energy Plus, that essentially RemRate and Energy Gauge were pretty close on most things, but Ecotrope was pretty far off, and really that it over predicted heating energy consumption in a lot of cases. And this is a kind of a weird thing. People go, well, wait a second. You just said that Ecotrope over predicted energy consumption. That doesn't make sense. My scores have typically been lower in Ecotrope. Well, that's the thing that's kind of interesting. When you have a home that is better than the reference home in terms of its specs, better insulation, better air tightness, better mechanicals, etc., then the more that the consumption is driven up for the rated home, so is the consumption for the reference home, but therefore there are greater savings to be gleaned when you essentially exaggerate consumption. So that's why, especially in colder climates, why I think the marketplace, close to 10 years ago, took a look at Ecotrope and said, wow, I'm getting better scores here. I'm going to have to start really kicking the tires on this whole Ecotrope thing. I mean, I like using rem rate. That's why I got trained on, or I like using energy gauge. That's why I got trained on. But I got to look at this other Ecotrope thing. And that's at least a big part of it, is that the assumptions within the software, and I'm not exactly sure what those are. I've heard different things about what's the underlying simulation engine for Ecotrope. I don't know what it is. As far as I'm aware, it's not a standardized calculation engine like Energy Plus, which rem rate hourly is now based off of, or the Doe 2.1, which is the sort of the predecessor to Energy Plus, which Energy Gauge is based on. So Ecotrope kind of has its own thing, its own proprietary simulation engine. And anyways, 5 years ago, it was pretty clearly and definitively, defined that, it was relative to its competitors over predicting heating energy and therefore, producing lower scores. So that was identified 5 years ago. Would you believe it, Sandy? Today, those boundary conditions still have not been enforced. So they already know what they want to tighten the bounds to, but the enforcement hasn't happened yet. Now, apparently, Neil Cruz, the ResNet's energy modeling director, kind of put his foot down and said, "Darn it, we're gonna create some type of firm date for compliance for this." So in December, apparently the committee is going to be creating an actual hard date when that is going to take place, but we're not sure when it's going to be enforced. So they're going to create December is the date when they're going to create the date that eventually will have to be enforced. But I mean, that could be 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, 5. I have no idea. So, I don't know. It's a little bit weird there, Sandy. I don't know. What do you think?
I think that the consistency issue is a giant issue. And I think that it's been for a long time. I think that, you know, certain situations have been taken advantage of, due to the differences in the two softwares. And, it concerns me. I think that, part of, ResNet's job is to regulate these things to make sure that everybody's on a fair playing field. So if we have an unfair fair playing field, it's not fair to anybody, right? It's not fair to the utility companies. It's not fair to the consumer. It's not fair to anybody. So I think my other big problem is I was in that same meeting in 2019 at you were, and when they showed, and they talked about it, it's like, but we're going to do something now. And here we are 5 years ago, and we're still chatting it around. And I'm like, if it follows typical industry, protocol, they'll talk about it in December. They'll give it 2 years to be implemented, and then there'll be an extension a year and a half down the road. And I just, to my point, at some point, you got to put your foot down. That's my feeling on it. I mean, it's not unlike, a software company going out of business and there only being one competitor. Now we have three, but one really only stays in one part of the world. Um, I think that you have to have a fair playing field in order to make it fair for everyone. And I just don't think I think it's wrong on the part of ResNet not to push this harder, faster, and make it happen. That's my
Well,
opinion.
and it's kind of one of those things where, at some point you got to rip off the Band-Aid. but did you let the wound fester for too long? Because here's the inside baseball here. Ecotrope has taken over the lion's share of the industry market share, and I want to give them credit. Part of the reason why is because, frankly speaking, the web-based interface is convenient to use. It's a little bit more simplified. They have created relationships across the industry to really try to give their customers what they need, whether it's a utility or it's rating providers. So I want to give Ecotrope their flowers just as a product by itself. I think that they've really worked very hard in order to deliver a really good quality product and good customer service. But, let's call it for what it is. At least in some areas of the country, part of what has motivated the market to work with them has been the difference in scores.
It's a competitive advantage.
Right. And so here's one of the challenges that got brought up. So a couple of Bears raters are based in Massachusetts. Massachusetts has a HERS as code, stretch code, implemented in the majority of communities throughout the state. And they're tightening those requirements very significantly. So now scores are going to have to be in the 40s, and that's tough. That's tough for conventional building to be somewhere in the 40s. And so here's the thing, the state regulators who created those rules, they kind of were basing that off of the trajectory of what they were used to. So like, okay, people have gotten used to being a 55. Let's tighten it back down. I don't know how they made that sausage. Like, how did they decide on scores in the 40s, et cetera? But let's just say that, eventually this is going to be implemented, whether it's a year or 2 years or whenever it is. And let's just say that scores go up an average of 10%, because of this change in how heating, consumption is calculated primarily. Well, all of a sudden, if you're getting somewhere with your builders building to 45, which is no small feat by itself, you might very well go back up to a 50.
Yeah. That's a big problem.
It's a huge problem, and it's something that, whether it's right or wrong that we kick the can this far down the road in holding a more firm line, well, Sandy says it's wrong, and I don't disagree with him. But whether it was right or wrong, the longer we let it fester, and if we don't communicate proactively with the rest of the rating community, which includes people making policy, we're going to get ourselves in a lot of trouble here. So I'm really encouraging ResNet to get proactive, not reactive, not conservative. Because here's the other issue is that, well, builders are using HERS rating scores as ESG and blah, 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 blah. They're committing to this score or that score. And we can't mess that up by altering the scores. Well, I understand this is not
Chris,
something.
That's what's happening with Energy Gauge in Florida. I mean, the scores are significantly less in Florida because of that exact thing. And builders are reluctant, especially builders that manage their HERS scores, are reluctant to switch to any other software because it gives them a different rate, amount. It's in the transverse, but it's still the same thing. And I would say that this is why consistency is so important, right? I mean, we can't have this. And, I think there's even a bigger problem here is, what about all these utility programs, and how's that going to affect them, especially ones that are based on energy consumption?
Yeah, no,
I think there's a lot of things to think about.
That's a great point because, like if you are utility A that's sponsoring a new homes program, and you're doing it because your deemed savings are whatever it is. Well, now if you are essentially getting 10% less savings, is that program even worth doing anymore? That's the risk, and so, is Energy Star as easy as it's been? Because, that should be a little bit more predictable, but it's hard to say, but, all I can say is kicking the can down the road and more and more and more is not going to, it's not going to help practitioners, that's for sure. And I don't think it's going to help ResNet. I think it's helping Ecotrope. Ecotrope is, they've benefited from a marketplace where they've basically had an outlier software, and it's been known. Now, here's the other thing I want to say about this session that I attended on this update. Software is complex, and there's a lot of different things that can get thrown off in software, and it's not always the easiest. The assumption always is that the software is wrong, right? And that the outlier software must be wrong. So if I'm comparing rem rate to ecotrope, and ecotrope's a lot lower, well, maybe ecotrope has something goofy going on with it, or maybe rem rate does. Sometimes it's actually something that's totally benign. Like an example was brought up actually by a Bear Raider had sent us a file in Vero Beach, Florida, and Ecotrope, because of the zip code, had selected Port St. Lucie, which is just like 20 minutes south, basically, of Vero Beach. And the scores were off by like a few points off of just the difference between those two climate locations. And that didn't make any sense. Well, it turns out TMY3 weather data, which is the requirement for weather data within software, it turns out that that data is kind of old and kind of maybe not the best at this point. So now there's TMYX data that is probably for the 2025 301 cycle. That's going to be the new standard. It's going to be TMYX, which has more up-to-date climate locations. And they're probably going to narrow or winnow down the potential options for climate locations just to have increased consistency. So I do want to give Neil Cruz, the software modeling director, his flowers. He definitely has been working hard in order to try to address some of these consistency issues. I'd just say, hey, if you're a Bear Raider, or even if you're not, if you see something that doesn't seem right, send it our way. We'll try to tease it out, and if not, forward it on to them, because it's definitely a topic that needs to continue to get better. So, all right, Sandy, what do you got next? What's your number 4?
Number 4, I had workforce development offers unique talent acquisition opportunities for Raiders. So there's a lot of workforce development stuff going on, jobs to build, which is the Build 2 Foundation. You have all this, the states looking to start implementing workforce development. We covered in one of our podcasts here recently the fact that, green jobs and energy jobs are up, and by a good percentage. And I think that was the one thing, these people are getting involved in our industry. They have booths at the ResNet conference where, they're talking to people at places like the BPA, all these places. There's a lot of workforce development money out there and going to be out there over the next year or so. And I just think Raiders need to be cognizant of that and be paying attention to their local programs and these foundations and these associations that are going to be offering this, because it's going to be, a pretty good opportunity. In some cases, there's even funding. So, where they help support the training and certification of these Raiders. So, and RFIs. So I think that I thought that was something that didn't exist before in our industry, really. Most of us that especially worked in the direct rating providership were on Indeed and Monster, and we're trying to find people who would be interested in a very segmented, very small, very boutique type of business. I think now we're looking to, build these type of jobs, and these jobs fall right into that category for energy, and workforce development. So I thought that struck me. I was glad to see that. I know that many of our Raiders and people in our industry struggle with finding the right people to fit in the jobs, and if we can get to the point where we're actually developing leads for these people through these associations and organizations that come in trained and certified, that you really just have to polish off, get them into your systems and everything. I think that represents a great opportunity for our business as a whole. And they don't distinguish between a large rating company or a small rating company. You just might need one guy, and they can help out with that. So that's exciting. A lot of it's not set up yet, but I think it's exciting and something to look forward to, over the next year or so in our industry.
Right. Well, yeah, I mean, if you think about this, when 15 years ago, when the ARA funding came out, there was a lot of money that went toward green jobs. And we talked about that with Xavier Walter a few episodes ago. Was it money well spent? Was it not? Well, hey, I was a beneficiary. So was Xavier. So was many other people that I know in this industry. So I think a lot of people did get prepared to hit the next stage of their career through that funding. For the last say 10 years, really by and large, it's been greenfielding it.
Yep.
If you wanted to get trained and certified staff, you had to do it yourself. We've had low unemployment, so there's been low motivation for, you know, a random person to want to go out and accelerate their career by getting a brand new, certification or training. Some people have, but at the same time, not that many. And there hasn't been a lot of like funding mechanisms for it. So, like,
No.
yeah, if you're an employer like BER and I want to go and hire somebody, it's kind of a grab bag out there. Like, I have to look for sort of nascent skills and experience, not so much people who are fully certified with demonstrated experience, because there's just not that many of them out there. And so you
Yeah.
kind of have to go out there and find people and build them and then hope for the best, because the challenge is not everybody is going to want to do this work. I've done hearse rater trainings where people just literally came up to me in the middle of the training. They said,
Yep.
I don't want to do this. I'm not going to want to climb ladders and go into attics and assess insulation. I don't want to carry blower doors. I don't want to tape ducts. And look, I don't blame them. Look, it's hard work, and it's not glamorous. I like it because I'm a nerd and I see like the broader vision and why we do it. But not everybody is like that.
No.
And so, I think that there is an opportunity for this money that's coming out again through the Inflation Reduction Act to be put to good use. If we can help to sort of normalize the career trajectory of people entering this field, what are the baseline skills that they need so that employers might be able to turn to something a little bit more tangible when they go to hire?
Yeah, and I think, look, I've lived this life almost my whole career, right? I mean, it's like it's hard to find people who really want to do this, and so have you, Chris. I mean, it's hard to find people don't know what they do, and what when you're scrolling Indeed, if you're the average person, and you go past this, whatever you want to call them, energy auditor, HERS rater, you just keep going because you don't even know what that means, right? I mean, like, so it's presented probably the biggest hiring challenge of my life, being in this industry. And yes, myself as well. I can't tell you how many people. Well, I've had a few I had to, get out of the class too that just was never going to make it. But there's been a lot of people over my time, in when I was training, especially where they just didn't want to do this, and nobody knows because nobody understands it, and some people don't like the building science side. Not everybody's willing to work hard and be a nerd all at the same time. You know what I mean? Like it takes a certain type of person to really excel at this in the field. But I think it's also going to represent an opportunity for beyond the field, right? I mean, I came into this industry with a ton of management experience, and I believe that that's helped me in my career. And I think that we can start to attract and make it more mainstream, with these programs where we can start attracting, not everybody's, works in the field. Some people want to work in the office. Some people want to do energy modeling. Some people, so I think it's great to see. It really encourages me to see our industry going in this direction. I just find it to be a breath of fresh air, and I'm excited for it. And, I think it's going to have a big impact for everyone, in the not so distant future.
Right. Well, I'm looking forward to it as an employer for sure. Moving right along, observation number 3 from me along the same trend of energy modeling software is not being entirely consistent. Guess what's also not consistent, Sandy?
Oh, I don't know. Tell me, Chris.
Well, we talked about it in the very first segment. Heat pumps. It's on everybody's mind. Everybody loves those heat pumps. Replace your gas furnace with a heat pump, and you'll save the planet. That's all you need to know, right, Sandy?
Yeah, not
Yeah.
quite.
Well, as we learned before, it's more complex than that, and it turns out that it's even more complex than I realized before the conference. So, the best, believe it or not, I actually go to these things to learn, and I learned something very important at the ResNet conference. I learned that the HSPF values whether it's the old HSPF or HSPF2, is kind of garbage. It's not a good predictor of how the systems are going to run, especially for modern variable capacity heat pump systems. And what is variable capacity? Variable capacity, as they explained in this session very eloquently, is, think of it as being inverter driven heat pumps or variable speed heat pumps or, cold climate heat pumps. These are all the same terminology that basically describes the same type of system, which is basically a compressor that can modulate the flow of refrigerant and therefore is a variable capacity based system. So again, cold climate heat pumps, inverter heat pumps, Mitsubishis or Fujitsu's or Daikins or LG's, or now even Carrier has them and Trane has them.
Yeah.
And so, everybody is in on the heat pump game, increasingly so. But the issue is that it turns out that these systems, the way they actually perform is on variable capacity curves and consumption curves, basically at multiple different speeds settings for basically speeds of the compressor, and then also multiple different temperatures. So not just 14 and 17 degrees. So HSPF is basically derived from sort of a fat fingered curve, and it's more or less set at 47 degrees. It's kind of like what it would perform like on a moderate day in climate zone 4.
Okay.
So that's kind of what HSPF is based off of. Well, take that same system and go and put it in Detroit, it's going to perform differently. And if you take that same one, you go and put it down, in coastal Florida where you are, it's going to perform differently. So it turns out that in order to get a pretty good predictor of heat pump consumption for these variable capacity systems, you need more like 2 speeds and like 4 or 5 temperature bases. 47 degrees, 17 degrees, 5 degrees, 0 degrees, and sometimes even a negative temperature in order to truly derive what is the actual coefficient of performance, the actual energy consumption of these systems going to be. And so, long story short, none of us are doing it right. Now, there's been some trickery in the industry. People have gone, well, there's a COP value at 47 degrees. I'm just going to put that in the software. You're not supposed to do that. And the reason why is that if you enter in an ecotrope or REM rate COP, then it's going to assume that there's no seasonable adjustment factor on the compressor. So it's basically as if it's constantly running at that best case COP value. That's not right. So entering in HSPF is going to get you closer to the truth because it at least basically says this system running at 47 degrees, there's going to be a degradation of performance as it gets colder. The thing is that may penalize certain systems that maybe have been engineered to perform better at really cold temperatures, but it also may be giving too much credit to other systems that really perform much worse at cold temperatures. So, long story short, we're doing it wrong. All of us are. All of us are modeling heat pumps wrong. And so, Sandy, kind of goes back to some of the things we've been talking about here over the last few episodes. It's like, this is a tough thing to just fat finger and just go, replace your furnace with a heat pump. Like, because there's cost implications, there's system performance implications. Speaking to a couple of our raters who are actually really into kind of like the predictive element of all of this, of electrification, the grid scale predictability of it. Well, what happens if we're putting in heat pumps that look decent from HSPF, but they perform terribly under very cold temperatures? And let's just say you're putting them in the Northeast. Well, the Northeast is maybe more moderate, but it gets cold. And so if we're all of a sudden, having a cold snap in New York State, and everybody has these like, not the greatest heat pumps, as it turns out, at cold temperatures, we may be causing there to be blackouts and brownouts where the grid really just cannot keep up. So I hate to tell you it, Sandy, ain't that easy. But the good news is that, again, I want to give ResNet its flowers. ResNet's stepping up, having an energy modeling director, having a software consistency committee. It may seem, it's easy to be cynical and just say, it's not
Yeah.
moving fast enough. These guys aren't doing enough. I actually think that they're really trying to take head on some of these more challenging issues. So I do want to give the organization some credit for what it's trying to accomplish. But I hate to tell you right now, it's just not that simple.
Yeah, and you and I talked about this before. It's like, you know, um, even things like cold climbing heat pump optimization. I mean, how many people can really do that? And are we prepared as an industry to really? Well, yeah, but you know what I mean. But you understand what I'm saying. I mean, I just don't think that we know how to handle these things good enough as a constituency of the energy field, let alone, have we been educated on the differences and how exactly all this stuff works. And, it was interesting when you were, you didn't get to really go as deep as you did today with me after the conference about that. But I think that there needs to be a lot more education, and I think that somehow, some way, we got to figure out how we're going to educate, raters and probably HVAC guys and everybody on how to really do this. I mean, let's face it. I mean, a lot of the HVAC contractors, and I'm not throwing darts here, but a lot of them haven't been to school in 25 years. I mean, they're not keeping up with the latest technology, and so when you get into things like retrofit, and it's a mess. And but it's a great point that you bring up. Awesome point. And I just think through education is the only way we're going to overcome it. You know.
Yeah, well, and some type of at least intermediate solution, So there was some talk about like, well, by the ResNet 301 2025 standard, we're going to have a better process. I'm like, so it's 2023 right now.
So we're gonna
The
go a year
30
and
301 2022 isn't even approved and implemented yet. So, you know what? It's going to be by like 2028 that we're going to be modeling heat pumps correctly. Like that seems
too
like too
late.
far. So I really pushed for a intermediate solution. Can we get at least more data points to get a better predictive value to enter into the software? Hopefully, I can keep pushing on that and get something sooner. Because what I'm concerned about is otherwise we're going to start putting a lot of heat pumps in people's homes. They're going to underperform.
Well,
Then there's going to be a
Chris,
knee
in
jerk
five
away
years
from it.
into this, we're talking about 5 years into this, right? Until we have a standard, and there's only 9 years left of all the funding for all this stuff. It's like it doesn't really make sense.
Well, yeah, I mean the money's. I mean the heat pump production's ramping up. So what happens if we start incentivizing some of the less good performing heat pumps? Like that would be
A fair
bad.
point.
Like
Yeah.
so let's get the most out of our federal money. Keep going, Neil Cruz with the ResNet Software Consistency Committee. Sandy, what do you got for number 3?
I have Raiders need more 310 training. That was the buzz of the conference, and we've been, as you well know, you and I did a few of them.
Wait, what is 310? I don't even know what that is. What is it?
Yeah, the standard 310 for grading HVAC systems. So the buzz all about was, well, there was two parts of it. One was our trainings that we've been given across the country. Anybody that participated in them thought they were awesome, felt like they learned a lot. We got a lot of great feedback from not only you and I, the couple that we did, Chris, but with our staff. But everybody is saying the same thing. It's like we don't know how to use this equipment. We don't know how to, to do the test functionality wise in the house or home. So I took away that, everybody, I have a fistful of cards here somewhere with people like, hey, when you have the next one here, let us know. When you have the next one there, let us know. So a lot of people are interested in it. I think that, as an industry, we kind of threw this out there with a standard, but we've taken a proactive approach in trying to train and educate people, especially in the implementation of the testing process. Anybody can watch the videos, anybody can pretty much figure out the spreadsheet, but actually using these tools that a lot of raiders never used before and methods that a lot of raiders have never used before has seemed to be a struggling point. And, I would say that that was one of my better, I mean, there was a track on it in, the conference. I got mixed feedback on that. But it's hard to kind of do what we do in an hour long conference. You know what I mean? But I would just say that I felt as though there was a lot of people, anybody that, brought up the HVAC grading in a conversation, and I told them, hey, if they didn't know, which a lot of them already knew we were doing it, they were very interested in it. And I think it's something that, the industry needs, if we're going to, pursue this, especially in places like Massachusetts, right, with the stretch code, where these points are going to make a big difference. We need to get the word out more and more, and everybody needs to attend our training. But so, what are your thoughts on that, Chris?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, again, for if y'all didn't realize, Bear has been going around the country teaching ResNet 310 HVAC grading training, live and in person, about half day sessions, usually a classroom of about 10 raters and RFIs. And the goal of this is it's not mandatory to do this, but the thing is that raters historically have not been really trained very well on assessing HVAC performance. It's really been something that I would say has been ancillary to our education and expectations to demonstrate knowledge. And because of that, raters are very uncomfortable with things like blower fan airflow measurements. They're very uncomfortable with static pressure measurements. God forbid you try to measure wattage on an air handler, or else you're going to kill yourself and burn down the house and everything like that. So we've tried to bring it to people, get their hands on with the tools and the techniques, and walk through the standard and show why it's actually not as difficult as people think that it is, or that it doesn't have to be dangerous. It doesn't have to be exceptionally time consuming, really. I will say the one thing, it seems like, the industry is really excited about it, but they're kind of like, okay, the design is still not there. Like, that's to me like one of the things that's, because the raters and the RFIs, we can build their knowledge, but if the designers are not actually designing the systems well, if they're just using kind of like BS standards of practice, oh, well, I have that same 3,000 square foot house. I'm just going to change the address and, change the orientation. And there you go. There's your design. Or maybe not even doing that. Like, I mean, I think there's just a lot of non-designs or bad designs happening in our industry still. And then those get translated into the field. Sometimes they don't even get translated into the field. And so then when you have underperforming installations because of either bad design or poor installation, your goose is cooked. You're not going to be able to meet the 310 standards. So, I consider this to be a huge opportunity for raters. Work with your builders, work with your HVAC contractors to try to get better design going in buildings. Because otherwise, we can teach you how to use the tools and do the techniques, but it's still going to be not a slam dunk, unfortunately. All right, moving on
Agreed.
to observation number 2, and I'm calling an audible. I'm changing mine up here a little bit because there was something I forgot about, Sandy. Oh boy, I created a stir, man. I don't know if you heard about this, but man, I get myself in trouble sometimes, but sometimes running my mouth pays off. And I created one of the moments of the conference apparently by speaking my truth about the proposal to eliminate insulation grading in exchange for a properly installed versus not properly installed proposal, which is coming out through a combination of NAMA, the North American Insulation Manufacturers Association, plus some members of the ResNet community. Very much believe that we need to be eliminating the grade 1, grade 2, grade 3 system in exchange for a good or bad type of system. And here's the logic. I want to give you the logic behind it first. So the logic is that manufacturers' specifications are what is called out in the building code for installation of insulation. Really, there isn't supposed to be a grading system when it comes to code. It should either be good or bad when it comes to code. And therefore, this system that we have, it's like raters are trying to apply our system to the building code in a way that's not really formally recognized. And that may be allowing for substandard insulation to be going into buildings and still passing something like a performance methodology or an ERI or something like that. And so it makes the insulation manufacturers uncomfortable. It makes code officials and policy wonks uncomfortable. And so the idea is to boost the baseline expectations of installation practices by basically saying you're either going to pass or you're not. You're either going to do it right or you have to do it over again. And it's going to come with a big penalty on the ERI calculation if you have a not properly installed level of insulation. Then it's going to be a 10% reduction in the installation's performance. So right now, grade 1 in the software is 0% reduction in installation performance. So an R21 performs like an R21. For grade 2, it's a 2% reduction in performance, and for a grade 3, it's a 5% reduction. Anything beyond a grade 3 is supposed to be separately called out as a separately like uninsulated assembly. I think that what I can say about our system, it's imperfect. There's probably a lot of raters giving too much credit for certain insulation products, particularly bat products, and not just fiberglass bats, but maybe particularly fiberglass bats. You know, here's the thing. I like fiberglass bats. There's nothing wrong with them. I'm not a fiberglass bat hater. I'm not one of those guys that says it can never be grade 1. I've seen it grade 1. I've seen it within the last year grade 1. But I don't see it grade 1 typically. And why? Well, because it's a 3D polygon of fluffy stuff that has to go into a 3D cavity with sharp edges and, you know, with pipes and wires and other framing members in the way of the cavity. And it's really difficult to install the insulation perfectly filling the cavity, cut around all those penetrations and obstacles, and then being flush back to front, you know, flush with the sheathing, flush with the drywall on the front. It's really difficult to do that consistently. I'm not saying it can't be done, but it's a more labor intensive process to get grade 1, particularly with fiberglass bats. I mean, and there's other insulation products that have challenges. Spray foam has challenges. A lot of raters are like, oh, it's spray foam, it's grade 1. Not necessarily. I mean, there's a lot of really bad spray foam out there because
Peaks and yeah.
well, spray foam's challenging because you usually have a two-part component, at least for closed cell foam,
Close
and
cell,
the
yeah.
ratio of those two chemicals, plus the pressures in which they're applied, plus the temperatures in which they're applied, plus the temperature of the substrate, all that matters. So we're literally doing on-site chemistry with spray foam, and it can end up having bad results. But the most popular insulation product in America is fiberglass bats because of economies of scale. And, you know, it's typically installed per square foot on a piecemeal rate. And you have guys that are incentivized to go run and go get it done and throw that stuff in there. And as long as it's good enough and mainly filling the cavity and not having a whole lot of voids and really beat up, for the most part, I think we've just sort of accepted as an industry that that's as good as it's going to get. Now, in my opinion, that like good, bad install is a grade 2. That's my experience. It's a grade 2. And I've been pushing organizations like the EPA Energy Star Homes program to just acknowledge that grade 2 is good enough. It is. Because guess what? That's what's going in your homes. Energy Star has required grade 1 insulation for version 3, and I appreciate why they want to achieve that, but that is simply not happening writ large. It's not. I think that the industry tries. I really do. I think that the average rater tries to get their builders and their insulation installers to do better. I think we've largely eliminated grade 3 insulation as a result, and I think that's laudable. But the reality is 3D polygons of fluffy stuff are tough to get perfect in building cavities the way that we have it right now. You know, the industry has not en masse switched over to blown assemblies, blown cellulose, blown fiberglass. Some areas of the country it has, but largely across the country that has not happened due to cost. And we just have to start being more honest. And here's my concern, Sandy. If we just move to a binary, good or bad, guess what? Just about every installation in America is going to be. It's going to be
Good.
good. It's going to be good enough. And raters, they may try, but you're not going to even have a tool in your toolkit to really push for better. You can't say, well, look, if you don't do better, I'm going to have to call this a grade 3. You could say, well, I'm going to call it a not pass, and now you're going to fail this installation for code, and your project schedule is going to be thrown off. Nobody, I hate to tell you, that's not going to happen. Now you're coming at this industry from a slightly different angle. You were, the manager of several different, direct providers. What's your perspective? Is this going to improve quality and consistency, or is it going to risk watering it down more?
I call bullshit on all of it. I think that, and I'm glad you did too. Number one, Chris, is that let's just take it from the installation installer's perspective here. Number one, they have a new crew every week. Okay. I mean, that is you think some businesses are transient. That's the most transient. I mean, I've seen them in the same day be a different crew. That's number one. Number two, if you install an installation product according to the manufacturer's instructions, which what code says, it's a grade 1. Okay. So why wouldn't we bother doing that? Or it's close to a grade 1 if it's installed properly. Two, this up down thing, you keep doing the finger. Yeah, you got me doing it, you know, look, I think that I agree with your sentiment that I think as an industry that does HERS ratings and energy storage and things like that, we have seen a much less instance of grade 3. There's no doubt about it. Now, have we seen an improvement to grade 1? I don't know about that. I think we have some that are closer than others, but here's another thing which I find kind of, when you think about it, a code home, you know, a code home, very few raters are involved in the installation projects of a code home unless they're doing an installation inspection for code, right? So most of the time, we're not even seeing that, and God only knows what's in that. So, I mean, for industry's sake and for continual improvement, why doesn't naming all them go to our grading system?
That's
I
what I'm
mean,
saying.
it would make more sense. It would make more sense. I mean, a grade 2, except for Energy Star, would be okay. It's not going to completely destroy you on your HERS rating, but gives you a benchmark to where you're at, where you can improve. Number 2, we can have more education and involve the rating community in this to actually get these installation installers up to speed on what exactly it is we're looking for, right? And 3, I just say that it's a built-in excuse. And I think you're 100% correct when you say good or bad, installation inspections are going to go to 100% because people are going to take that as good enough. And you know what? My idea of good enough and your idea of good enough and my wife's idea of good enough are 3 completely different things. And, they say it makes it less subjective. I say it makes it more subjective.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I get the imperfections with the grade 1, grade 2, grade 3. And I think we need more education around that. We've been going off of like shaded diagrams, two-dimensional diagrams that were created by some people, 20 years ago in the ResNet standards. So we kind of went off of that for a long time, and then we kind of went the opposite way, and we created this extremely long-winded, pithy explanation of every single installation product and radiant barriers. Do you know you can grade gradient barriers? I don't even think the software even really has an input for it.
It doesn't.
But like we've almost gone to the far extreme. I mean, there should be some differentiation of the different installation products, but maybe we just need to retrain raters on our existing, now expanded grading system. And then again, I'm going to push back. Energy Star, love y'all. Your installation is grade 2. I hate to tell you, it just is.
No
now
doubt.
You might get grade 1 sometimes, and we should give people extra credit for that. But otherwise, let's just deal with the results of, we still want all these production builders, right? I bet Energy Star wants all these production builders, and these production builders are still using the iterant crews that change over with
The
frequency,
same.
working on piecemeal work on stilts, installing insulation, right?
Well, you know how you're getting the same product everywhere, right? It's the same crews installing everything from Code to hers to Energy Star. It's the same crews,
That's right.
So again, I mean, it's like look, I don't know why they're so insistent on a grade 1 when a grade 2. I mean, I get it, but maybe we should give like an award for grade 1, but make it okay for grade 2, right? I
Yeah,
mean,
that's what
maybe
I'm
that's a better
saying.
way to start.
That's what I'm saying.
What do they always say? Carrot and no stick. You know what I mean? So,
Yeah.
if you're getting grade 1 consistently, then that's great. It's all carrots. But if you're not, the stick, but it doesn't disqualify you from certification,
This is
because
what I'm
that's
saying.
really the main problem, right? That's the main problem with Energy Star. And what they're getting is lies. They're not getting the truth.
And EPA team, if you're listening, I sometimes give you guys a mouthful of my opinions. And I told you this before, but I'm going to say it again. If this goes through, the actual real world quality installation of insulation in your homes will go down. It will, because raters will have no incentive to try hard and to push people to do any better. They're not going to be giving builders a 10% penalty on their insulation. That's just not going to happen, folks.
No.
So anyways, I'm not a big fan of this proposal, and if you're not either, when it comes up, sometimes people like to talk like, oh, well, it's a done deal, we're just putting it out for public comment and then we're going to slam it through. Raiders, rise up, tell people this is a bad idea. Almost everybody in the room seemed to think it was a bad idea. So let's go ahead and submit our public comments and tell them this is a bad idea and put the issue to bed once and for all. All right, Sandy, what
Agreed.
was
Number
your number
2.
two?
My number 2 is ESG continues to be a driving force in the industry.
Oh yeah.
And the naysayers are there. And whether you agree with the tenets of ESG or not, it's ESG, ESG, ESG. I mean, just to put this in perspective for a minute, how important this is that every national builder that I know of has appointed a director of ESG or a vice president of ESG or some form of leadership that is directly involved in ESG for that publicly traded builder. That alone tells you that the trend is there and it's not going away. But even besides that, I mean, there was a few breakout sessions about, how ESG and how it applies to raters and how can raters be a force in this. And, these tools like hers and Energy Star and all these things give us a seat at this table. And it's very important. I think that, if you're not paying attention to this, you will soon be, because I, am fully 100% convinced that this is not going away. This is not a trend. And I think that, the more we see the focus on it, the more focus is going to be on what we do in our industry to help with that environmental score, specifically when it comes to ESG. So, to me, that was my number 2 takeaway.
Yeah, I mean, we talk about it a lot on the ResNet board of directors. This has become, dare I say, the driving purpose of our industry, more than any other
Close.
one thing. Yeah, for a while there, it was like builders wanted to do Energy Star to set themselves apart in the marketplace. Then for a while, it was the tax credit. Then for a while, it was energy code. And honestly, I think more than anything, now it's the opportunity with ESG in order to basically demonstrate good corporate stewardship, is really what is driving people to want to participate in our industry, or people, I should say. Well, corporations are people, right? Well, that's a whole other subject for another day. But it's driving the big
Straw
builders
man.
as well as some of the smaller and medium-sized builders to start to pay closer attention to this. So yeah, I don't think
Yep.
it's going away, and it's only going to become that much more critical over time, without a doubt.
Yep, and I think that legislation ultimately is going to be passed to regulate it, which will make a little bit more sense. I mean, right now there's 30 plus ways to measure ESG at least. But I think a lot of these companies too are taking matters in their own hands. So it's going to be interesting where it falls out. But I can tell you this: that snowball is coming down the mountain, and it's turning into an avalanche fast. So Raiders, be cognizant, and
Yep.
building performance professionals.
Yep. So, last but not least, my number one observation is that the EPA Energy Star Homes program is getting serious about quality assurance oversight of the Energy Star program. And Sandy, this goes back to something that we talked about a couple episodes ago, that there's some not so good things that happened with a particular entity in the industry that got some public acknowledgement, and it's caused a lot of disturbance. There was a lot of talk and chatter at the conference about this. So,
Yeah.
honestly, one of the things I wanted to say, was going to be my number one observation, was that ResNet staff seemed a little bit aloof during the conference, and honestly, I feel like they're a little bit walking on eggshells because of this whole thing. So I don't want to go into the details of that. If you don't know, you can find it if you want to go look for it. The problem is it might not be the only shoe to drop. It might just be the first shoe to drop. And so, the EPA understands now that with great opportunity comes great responsibility. Now that the 45L is based off of Energy Star, single family and multifamily homes as the baseline, we have to drive consistency more so, or, especially with the accelerated tax credit levels, there could just be way too much spending if all of a sudden people are rubber stamping this across the industry. And beyond the consumer issues and beyond the actual real world environmental issues, the cost implications for the country could be very, very great. So the EPA is taking a leadership role, and our episode number one, we kind of mused about this a little bit, what was going to happen with this EPA proposal on enhanced quality assurance. It seems like it's moving away from a proposal to you're either going to do it or you're out of the game.
Yep.
So I don't know. What do you think, Sandy? What's your read?
Well, I think, it's funny because people like you and me, we always feel like the lone wolf crying in the night, nobody's listening. We've been saying this for years, and, it's only going to take certain things to happen. I think that, look, you're not just dealing with the EPA here, right? You're dealing with the DOJ, you're dealing with the EPA, and you're dealing with the IRS, right? And you know that there's going to be a strong regulatory arm to all of this. I mean, they've said it was going to happen. It's happening. And if you're I don't know how you could be a naysayer anymore, but you said it the best, honestly. I think in our first episode was do the right thing. You know what I mean? That's number one. But number two, I think that, I'm actually thrilled that they're taking this approach, to be honest with you. I think that it might be a little hard. It's like rubbing a little, salt into the wound in the beginning, trying to, just making sure that everybody's doing the right thing. But I think in the end, it's going to, create a much better product for the consumer. It's going to create a much better product for the builder. And it's going to, help the earth, which are the three things we're supposed to be doing anyway. So if there are bad players, I think they're going to be eliminated either through the QA process that's going to be enhanced, or they're going to be, whacked with the regulatory process. But one way or the other, they're going to be gone. And that's going to, leave the good quality companies, an opportunity to improve their business and, by doing the right thing, it's going to reward them. So, I mean, I think this whole thing is great, but I can tell you this, they ain't playing, man. And, people better square up, because there's going to be, I don't think there's, right now, this is one thing. I think there'll be other things. I'm sure that, and, I think the amazing part of this is basically, this latest thing was basically EPA and DOJ, right? We haven't even heard from the IRS yet. So, in which they have their own thing too, right? Because they're in charge of this whole, like 45L program and stuff. So it's all kind of linked together. And I think that, as much as some people might not like the fact of enhanced QA or more QA, I think the industry needs it, and I think it's the right way to go.
Yeah, I mean, Thayer built our business trying to do the right thing. And look, I'm sure that people look at us from the outside and they go, these guys are full of shit.
Sure.
And look, I'm not saying that I'm perfect or Bear's perfect. In fact, I'll tell you, we're not perfect. We made a mistake from time to time, but we've never intentionally made the wrong mistake. We've never set out to do a pattern of making the wrong decision. And I think that that is a difference, and that's what we really need to address fundamentally
Yeah.
as an industry is we can't keep making the wrong decision intentionally. And I hate to say it, but there are a few companies that have. And you
Yeah.
know what? It hurts everybody. It hurts. It benefits the couple people who are fighting over the nickel, in order to be a nickel cheaper for the
It just gives
builder.
them
Um,
ammunition.
but think about the average rater out there trying to compete with companies that have watered down what it means to deliver a rating, watered down what it means to deliver Energy Star compliance verification, knowingly have given builders certificates when they shouldn't have, because frankly speaking, they couldn't either because they legit wanted to cheat or they just grew too big for their britches. Oh, they let the thing get out from underneath them, and then all of a sudden they didn't have enough staff, and the inspections got away, and then they're fudging numbers or whatever it is. Like I bet it actually probably is closer to the number two. That stuff just kind of got away from people. I'm trying to give someone the benefit of the doubt, Sandy. So I'd like to believe that people start off the right way and then they can kind of get themselves in over their heads. I don't know, but regardless, we cannot stop pretending, folks. Stop pussyfooting around it. Stop acting like this stuff doesn't exist. It's existed the entire time I've been in this industry. And, guess what? AI QA on the registry isn't going to fucking stop it either.
No.
And yeah, I'm running my mouth now for a reason because, yes, these tools and databases can help. They can, but we also need actual people who are certified professionals
With
to be
integrity.
looking at this. They need to go out to homes sometimes. Somebody came up to me and said, Chris, I heard you were a big antagonist against, remote QA. I'm like, QADs need to go into the field. They do. I'm sorry. QADs need to go into the field. Maybe not for every single QA, but on an ongoing, regular basis. They're supposed to be more well trained and more professional than
Well,
the
I mean, I think
raters that
that's
they're
part of the
overseeing.
problem, though, right? I mean, a lot of these companies look at their QA days as just somebody to get the task done. They don't, are they really, looking to move the ball? Are they really trying to improve the raters? I don't know. I mean, I think there's more fundamentally wrong than just ethics. You know what I mean? I mean, years ago, I don't know if you remember this, Chris, but years ago there was this whole thing about they were going to have a QAD boot camp, right? Before the ResNet conference, and I was like, yes, that's awesome, right? We get some guy like you in there. You're showing everybody, how to be the best QA you could be. You're going through process and procedures. You're sharpening the store, right? Let me ask you a question, and I want you to be honest about this. Do you think that these quarterly webinars for QADs are improving or raising the bar?
No, because they're usually so theoretical in nature. They're like, well, this thing might happen, but we're not sure. But it's sort of like I mean, look, I don't want to be disrespectful to
Well, I'm not being
ResNet.
disrespectful. That's not my point in that, though, Chris. My point is, though, I tell you what, you take a guy and you let him watch all four of those quarterly videos, or I take a guy and I put him with somebody like you, it is going to be a remarkable. And I'm not saying that to blow you up, but you're a really good QAD, right? Maybe one of the best I've ever seen. And I put him with you, and you go through the things. Who's coming out better out of that win?
Yeah, no,
Without take
I
yourself
hear
out of
you,
it.
and
Say
I
Uriah,
agree. I mean,
whoever.
and here's the deal: we employ QADs, right?
Yeah.
And we've had some people come to us who were trained and certified and credentialed from other entities that, frankly speaking, didn't know how to do QA.
Well, let
And
me ask you a question here, though. What do you and Uriah do with new QADs that work for Bear? You guys go out in the field with them.
We do.
You and Uriah.
We do. We do. We want them to
So
know how to do it the Bear
again,
way. And that may sound like hubris to somebody,
and I'm not
but to
trying to blow your
us,
ego up here. I'm just telling the truth. I mean, to me, that's the problem.
I hear you, and I
Part
don't
of the problem.
disagree. I hear you, and I don't disagree. I actually fully agree, and I hope that, look, ResNet needs to step up because they're still the leading HCO, and look, I'm on the ResNet board. I'm a fiduciary of the organization. I need the organization to be successful, and all I can say is the knee jerk to want to give people an easier path, like that's gone. That's gone, people. And QA isn't just this little like beep, like it's a little like beep, will just happen. Like, we'll get an admin to go do it. Like that's not going to happen. It's not going to happen. And one day we may have, some type of, all-seeing eye that figures it out, and we don't have to have human intervention. But that's not going to happen anytime soon. And so the EPA is calling for more direct oversight of the QA system for Energy Star homes from ResNet, from the HCOs. ResNet is one of them. And so ResNet's going to have to figure out how to crack this nut. And here's the thing, they've kind of benefited from having very few staff, fairly well-paid staff. Now they're going to have to figure out how to do this cost effectively. And look, I welcome
Run like
it.
a business.
Yeah, I mean, I welcome it. It's going to be a big challenge, though. It really is, and all I can say is I'm looking forward to seeing what the actual proposal is.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting, that's for sure. But great points, Chris, on all this stuff.
All right, Sandy, your last one. Last but not least.
Well, I would say that to me, the greatest part of this whole thing was reconnecting with all my friends and customers and associates and everybody at the ResNet conference. I mean, I went to the one in Texas, but it just didn't have the same feel, and I spent a long time, with a lot of people, and it was just awesome to be back in the groove and, spend time with people, go to some sessions, have lunch, chit chat, talk about the business. I found it, to me, it was probably the best experience I've had in a conference in a while. And, probably some of that is pent up, no conference, for, a while. But I would just say that, to me, as I value relationships greatly in my life, and the people that I know, and the people that I call friends, and the people that I work with. And to me, there's no greater expression than, the hugs were flying, and, it was just, to me, it was, I was in my place, and I really enjoyed it. And, then I got to spend some time with our staff. I got to spend a whole day with Uriah by myself, and I got to spend a lot of time with. So the whole experience was really good. I'm tired because I did 2 conferences in a row. So I was on the road 11 out of 14 days. But I will say that that, to me, that was my biggest takeaway. I really, really enjoyed it.
Yeah, the band was all back together. It was good to see some familiar faces. Lots of Bears Raiders were there. And if you're a Bear Raider and you haven't been to the ResNet conference, come on, y'all, come join us. We have a good time, and there are things to be learned. Like, I think it's easy to get a little bit cynical about this stuff, but like, there are things to be learned, and you don't even necessarily have to be like in session all day long, but like, I'm so relieved moving back to in person because, these relationships and catching up with people face to face and getting to know them on a more human level. I mean, the web-based conferences were a necessary evil for a couple of years, but they're just not any. You cannot supplant the real, the in person. The questions that come up when people are all together and they're asking real life questions about real life topics. I just think it's extremely valuable, and I appreciate ResNet sucking it up and getting back out there. This time of year was a little bit tricky for a lot of people. Kind of early November, not the best time of year necessarily to do a conference, but it was successful. Unfortunately, now we're going to have another year and a quarter pause here because, basically ResNet's not having a conference in 2024. They're waiting to get back on the normal schedule in 2025. So February 2025, that's the next time we'll be back together for ResNet. So we'll have to go and check out another couple good conferences next year, Sandy.
Absolutely. Well, we're definitely planning on that. But yeah, it was great, and I appreciated everything about it. It was had a smile on my face the whole time, so it was awesome.
Good deal. Well, typically we have a session 3 for running our mouths about a topic that's on hand. We're going to skip that for today. We've talked enough, and we're just going to go ahead and put a wrap on this one. Episode 5 of the BERcast in the bag. Thanks for listening. We'll catch you on the next one.
Thanks, everybody.